Welcome back to Politics, where we're talking about the beginnings of François Hollande on the world stage. He was at the United Nations General Assembly this week to discuss those first steps. Bernard Guetta, who is a columnist and an editorialist for France Inter Radio and Libération, Philippe Gély, who is the editor of the international pages of Le Figaro, and Douglas Yates, who is a professor of political science at the American University in Paris. Philippe Gély, we ended the first segment by talking about the differences between François Hollande and Nicolas Sarkozy. There is a difference in personality, but some also said, especially during the campaign here, international observers or foreign journalists, that François Hollande was a very Franco-French person. For instance, there were lots of promises that he would eventually deliver a foreign policy speech during the campaign. It never happened. He never went to China. He never went to Israel, etc., etc.
The great speech hasn't happened yet. And
it was supposed to be this week. But
yeah, I mean, the normal president, the likable person, all this is very good. But on the international stage, I think the question very often is, are you able to move people or countries and their policies toward the goal that you have defined? I can easily figure how Nicolas Sarkozy would have handled the Mali issue. I mean, it would have been, well, in terms of explanation at least, to the world stage as well as for the French public, it would have been something much more much stronger, trying to mobilize, I think, energies, saying that this is potentially the Afghanistan of France and Europe. I mean, this is a safe haven for terrorists. If we let it go, very soon we might have terror attacks on our soils. So the stake is very high. When you listen to François Hollande, you understand that this is not tolerable. You don't quite understand the stakes, in my view. And you understand that we are going to do something about it, that it's intolerable because you cannot let a country like Mali be cut off half of its territory and this kind of issues. But it still lacks something, in my view. And even though he was helped, sadly, by the terror attack in Benghazi, to get the Americans on board on this, I don't see President Hollande having been very proactive to do so before this event.
Right. Just to kind of go back to Nicolas Sarkozy, we'll listen to what he said when France decided to intervene in Libya.
Our determination is total. I say this with all solemnity. All those concerned must now face up to their responsibilities. It is a grave decision that we have come to take. Alongside its Arab, European and North American partners, France is resolved to take responsibility in its role in history.
La France est décidée à assumer son rôle devant l'histoire. Je vous remercie.
This was March 2011.
I think it illustrates what the point I just tried to make. I mean, when you are heading a middle-sized power like France, but still with a seat at the UN Security Council as a permanent member, I mean, you have to be a little bigger than normal, I think.
What do you make of that?
That's a great selection, because that's the France that we've gotten used to seeing. A France with a strong leader who's speaking the language of realpolitik. That is, France, a state, is going to act, and it will assume the responsibility for its actions.
Well, generally also with a reference to universal values, human rights, and so on.
And that's where I'm thinking, because it's very difficult to read Hollande precisely because he hasn't spoken a lot on the matter, but what I'm finding more and more is what I would call idealism. That is, Hollande's speech, when you do a breakdown, many of the things he's proclaiming are universal values, the struggle for freedom, women's rights, the depenalization of homosexuality, things that are, that are questions of values, and not so much about France acting, but France acting through institutions. And so I think what we have is, first of all, a huge difference of style, but also I think there might be a substantive difference. I think Francois Hollande might be a liberal institutionalist. And this would place him within his camp. There's sort of two sides. One, the Hubert Védrine side, former foreign minister, who's a realist, who says France shouldn't play the Atlanticist game and become a pet dog of the United States. It's got to maintain its independence. And the other side, which I think Hollande is tipping to here, the Pierre Moscovici side, which is the side that does have idealism, which talks about the realpolitik of human rights. In other words, an idealist vision might now be guiding Hollande.
But, you know, after all, this is quite simple. He's a socialist, he's a leftist, and he's an idealist. Of course he is.
Is he?
And
Really?
yes, he is, of course, on my eyes at least. But there is no question that Nicolas Sarkozy was much more energetic and a little bit more eloquent, because his eloquency, Sarkozy's one, wasn't so seducing and wasn't so convincing. But let's forget it. Hollande is not at all eloquent. I mean, not at all. He's quite dull again. And sometimes you had at the General Assembly of the UN the feeling that he was simply reading the directory. But on the substance, first, I agree with you deeply. He's an idealist. Second, he deeply believes in the power of conviction, of convincing people. And he's quite good on that job. Just remember the beginning of the relationship between Sarkozy and Merkel. It was terrible. I mean, really terrible. Even though the two of them were very close, politically speaking. Now, look at the beginning of the relation between Merkel and Hollande. It's much better, even though he's a socialist and she's a Christian Democrat, quite on the right.
Are you sure?
What? I would
The
say
relationship
so.
between Merkel and Hollande is better than at the
Better
beginning, you mean?
than it was, at least at the beginning, during the first year, between Merkel and Sarkozy. Yes, I would say so, definitely.
Wow.
Definitely. And why? Why? Because, again, Hollande is very, could I say so in English, readable? Easy to read, easy to understand, and he means what he says, and so is reliable. Very reliable for the other leaders.
My perception is...
Just a few sentences. And I would say that the relationship with Obama is quite easy already. It is very good with Monti and Rajoy in Spain. And it will be, on my eyes, I would take the bet. It will be very good with Merkel, because let's remember that both of them, and listen to that, are Christian. Hollande is a socialist coming from Christianity. He was educated in a very Catholic family with strong religious tradition. And he is a socialist now because he used to be a Catholic. And so there is something very, very strong and very interesting between the Christian Democrats, not only Merkel, but generally speaking, the Christian Democrat in Europe and Hollande, and just look at the relationship between Monti and Hollande. The two of them are a political pair now in Europe.
You beg to disagree, I think.
Yeah, well, no, I wouldn't argue that they may find, I mean, Merkel and Hollande may find a common ground pretty soon, but my sense is that until now they are having a hard time in Germany figuring out who this guy is and what his policies will be. frankly, I mean, well, we can argue on that, but that's really my impression. When you look at Sarkozy, Sarkozy was hard to follow. We have yet to follow Hollande somewhere on the world stage, except Europe. Europe, I think the French were quite ready to follow him on this issue of, you know, a more growth-oriented policy in Europe to come over the crisis. But even on this issue, I mean, when you preach growth, you have to act at home accordingly. And so far, it's not really the case. I mean, we will present a budget this week with, you know, a lot of new taxes, so some cuts in the government expenses, but probably not enough. And so he has taken the lead in some way on the European stage at the beginning of his presidency. And now we may very well find ourselves, I mean, France, in a very difficult position on the European stage.
Douglas Yates, do you think François Hollande is better than people might think in terms of building those key relationships in Europe, and maybe he'll do it elsewhere? He has not traveled that much and that far until now, for instance.
Yeah, so Europe is a good case because we actually have a lot of meetings and talks. The realist model of Sarkozy is Europe is a stage where the Franco-German axis determines everything. And so it's a state-driven institution, and leadership and rivalry for mastery of Europe is the way we interpreted it. And so we looked a lot at that relationship. Hollande takes over, and almost every magazine says, well, Angela Merkel is now the master of Europe. But he steps back and he does complex interdependence. This is how institutionalism works. He steps back and says, you're the boss, but why don't we do something with the ECB? And by enmeshing his rivals in the institutional morass of Europe, he basically unflowers them. He doesn't need that personality or that rivalry if he can enmesh Germany in institutional relationships, because the whole feature of liberal institutionalism is even the hegemon is constrained by institutions. And I think he can get her in that muck, in that mud, and keep Germany playing the role that France needs Germany to play.
Last issue, Bernard Guetta. Under Nicolas Sarkozy, there was this notion of a hyper-presidency, you know, a vertical of power, as it was known. Even foreign policy was totally concentrated at the Élysée presidential palace, and the foreign ministry or the foreign minister was there more or less as a decoration. They might not like what I'm saying, but so do you think we have revolved to a more normal era where the diplomats actually have a say?
Actually, it's not a more normal time for France, because the Sarkozy style was the style of every president of the Fifth Republic. I mean, he was much more, again, juvenile and energetic than Charles de Gaulle or François Mitterrand. Certainly, yes.
But he also had a whole diplomatic circle around him. That was
under this regime, the Fifth Republic, the president used to be the boss. And that's it. And that's it. And specifically in the field of the foreign policy. With Hollande, you're absolutely right. This is quite different because Hollande is regarding himself as the boss, but the boss of a team. And he wants to have a real team. And he wants the prime minister to be a real prime minister and the foreign affairs minister, specifically now, to be a real one. And Fabius is definitely, for the good or for the bad, we could discuss that, but is definitely the foreign affairs minister. This is not the president. This is not the president. And you could ask now the French diplomats at the Quai d'Orsay in Paris, and all of them will tell you the same thing. We are much more important, we, the professionals, with Hollande than we were with Sarkozy. And Sarkozy, by the way, didn't like at all the diplomats.
Do you share that assessment? Do you
disagree.
think it's a good thing, or maybe it's better when everything is centralized?
I'm not sure it's quite relevant, in fact. I mean, obviously, Hollande is a team player. But if it comes to launching a war or having a critical role into a war in Mali or elsewhere, I mean, there will be only one person responsible for the decision. And it won't be the foreign affairs minister or even the defense minister. It will be the president. And so we'll have to stand up to the task.
The final decision is for the president, of course.
And the responsibility.
The responsibility, of course. The political responsibility, of course, certainly, yes. But the job of organizing it is not the president's one.
What I meant is, it's fine with me. I mean, if it works better this way, great. But
apparently speaking about Mali does work.
Just the last word, because you have to end it here. So you all agree that François Hollande will be a war president soon, that France will go to war.
I'm afraid so.
In Mali.
Well, I think that it will be providing strategic and tactical support for an African intervention in Mali.
Yeah, but when you have people in the middle of it, you cannot stay on the fringe of the story.
It will be obviously quite difficult. You're right.
Okay.
You're right.
On this final word, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you for watching this edition of Politics here on France 24. We'll see you next week.